Rita. And with us on the line is California State Senator Suzette Valladares. Suzette, how are you doing today?
Good morning, Carl. I am doing phenomenal. I am here in Sacramento serving and representing our community, and it is a blessing and an honor.
And you got to Sacramento on an airplane, not on the high-speed rail, correct?
That's cute. That's very true, Carl. I came on an airplane, and even if there was the high-speed rail to use, which there's not, I would not be riding it.
Yeah, and I want to talk about the high-speed rail with you because I know you're talking about some legislation about it, and they're also at the time doing an investigation up there on the money spent. How much money has been spent so far?
So far, there's approximately $17 billion that have been spent, and their projected budget continues to grow. Just to kind of recap here, Carl, the project was first approved by voters back in the early 2000s, and the voters were told it was going to cost about $30 billion. And that budget has been ever growing to now $130 billion. But as we look at just kind of some of the money that's been being spent to date, there's been about $1.6 billion on marketing and materials. There's been an additional $1.6 billion $1.6 billion on materials and consultants. Another $1.4 billion connecting a field to an orchard. So really, the amount of money that's been spent for so little, not a single track has been laid, not a single train has been moved, and now the federal government is taking a look.
And they definitely need to take a look, this whole thing. And on top of that, the original projection of getting it originally was going to be set up to connect Los Angeles and San Francisco, but the amount of time that is required to get up there is going to make it very, very difficult to get people to buy into this, no matter what the price.
Exactly. And that's the other question is, right, you know, they just don't have a ridership, and they don't have, we're afraid that it's going to be too expensive to buy a ticket for the high rail, as well as, Carl, we have a declining population right now because California doesn't like to focus on the issues that actually matter, the issues that help people stay in this state and thrive. Our priorities are just totally backwards, which is why I am fully supportive of, if you saw recently in the news, Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy came out to California. He's calling for a federal investigation of the over $4 billion in federal taxpayer dollars that have already been spent on the high-speed rail. I'm glad that the administration is helping us peel back these layers and call for and carry out transparency and accountability on high-speed rail.
Right now, the other major topic you're working on right now is the Safety Before Criminal Sanctuary Act. Tell us about that.
Yes, sir. So, California, again, because of policies passed through a far-left legislature and signed by a far-left governor, has become less safe. And last year, we saw the breaking point, and we saw that voters are sick of living in a California where criminals have more rights than victims, where criminals have been emboldened by the repealing of, it feels like, every law that keeps us safe, right? Voters at the ballot box said, we want safe communities. And they overwhelmingly passed Proposition 36. So I'm actually working on two things. One is Republicans, and in a bipartisan effort as well, are calling for the governor to fully fund Prop 36 because that proposition does need resources in order to provide law enforcement the tools to get out there and hold criminals accountable. But the other thing that we the Safety Before Criminal Sanctuary Act does is it takes a look at SB 54, which, if you remember this, Charles, our community overwhelmingly opposed SB 54. It's sanctuary state, and we oppose it just based on safety. So what Senator Brian Jones and I are doing is we presented a piece of legislation that is a common sense measure to tighten up our sanctuary state policies to safety. This bill is going to ensure that violent criminals, the worst of the worst, are not shielded from federal immigration authorities, and will allow law enforcement to use every tool in the box to hold those worst of the worst criminals accountable regardless of their documentation status.
With a supermajority of Democrats up in Sacramento, Suzette Valladares, what do you think the odds are of you being able to get this passed?
Well, you know what? We're hopeful. We've been told, like last year, I wasn't in the legislature, but we saw Prop 36 move forward, and we saw a lot of bipartisan efforts to move forward laws that would repeal some of these outrageous anti-public safety laws. There is actually bipartisan support up here, Carl. And interestingly enough, the Democrats are scared. The Democrats in Sacramento, especially the more moderate-leaning Democrats that come from working-class districts, they see the mandate that voters sent to them this past November. Again, to remind you, Carl, we had President Trump flip 10 counties, 10 more counties in California voted for President Trump, and we flipped 2 assembly seats and 1 Senate seat that were heavily favored in Democrat voter registration. I think now is a time we're seeing a shift in voter sentiment. They want voters and Californians want Sacramento to work on things that keep them safe, that make life more affordable. So I'm hopeful that there's an appetite to support common sense measures like this over the next couple of years here.
We're chatting with Suzette Valladares, our California State Senator, covering this area and beyond. And Suzette had served in the Assembly a number of years ago, and now is back as our state senator, having been up in Sacramento now for a couple months?
Yeah, it's been about 2 months now. I blinked, and we've rolled our sleeves up, and we got to work day one.
So you talked about the Democrats being scared right now. What else was different this time out in terms of the whole atmosphere in Sacramento?
Well, yeah. Again, I think it's a mandate that the voters issued this past November. What's different up here now from when I served in the Assembly is I'm actually hearing Democrats in our conversations. We have bipartisan caucus meetings. We go to conferences together to learn about a variety of issues. And for the first time, Carl, I'm hearing them use words like affordability. That those words, when I was up in the Assembly, never crossed the lips of any Democrat in the legislature. And now they're seeing it, that Californians have had enough. And they're hearing it from their Democrat voters too, right? My family is very much divided. We have Republicans, we have Democrats, and the affordability crisis, right now isn't picking between Republican and Democrat voters, right? It's impacting everyone. So it does feel different up here, but there's still a pretty significant block of progressive far left Democrats that have a pretty good number of votes up here. So it's going to be an interesting couple of years here in the legislature, but it's promising to hear my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, some of them, talk about addressing affordability.
And I believe part of the chipping away is going to be difficult with our current governor up there. Your predecessor, Senator Scott Wilk, once shared an interesting story with me. And Scott, as you know, termed out, had spent time in the Assembly, then was leader of the Republican Party for the state and Senate, and That and $2.95 will buy you a cup of coffee up there. But he shared that when Jerry Brown was governor, he would meet every week with Scott and his counterpart in the assembly, and then the majority Democrats. So the four of them would have a meeting with Jerry Brown, and they would be able to talk through ideas, agree to disagree, argue things out, and he would be able to make a little, Scott would be able to make a little dent in policy because Jerry Brown would listen to him. He might not agree with him, but at least listen to him. That when Gavin Newsom took over, guess how many times Senator Wilk met with Gavin Wilson? Okay, how about Gavin Newsom?
Oh, I know this number.
Say
It's a
it.
big fat zero.
Exactly, zero. So my question is, right now, from your perch, do you see Newsom reaching out to the Republicans at all for any guidance?
No. And it's rather sad because what Scott may not have mentioned is it's my understanding that there's been a long tradition of the governor meeting with the legislature. And, they used to call it the Big Five, right? And that was mostly during budget negotiations. And the Big Five were the governor, the Senate pro tem, the Assembly Speaker, and then the minority leaders. So Republican Assembly Leader, Republican Senate Leader. And they'd have major conversations about policy and about the budget. But the governors have also had a tradition of building relationships with the Democrat caucus and the Republican caucus. And that doesn't exist either, Carl. And it's not just that Gavin Newsom, I expected, especially when I was in the Assembly, to come up here and to never have meetings with Gavin Newsom. But what I didn't expect is that he wouldn't even be meeting with members of the Democrat Party, right, outside of leadership. And so there is a real disconnect between the legislature and the governor, and it doesn't only exist amongst Republicans, it's amongst Democrats as well. And unfortunately, we have a weak leader at the helm of California SHIP. And it's a reason why I believe the past 6 years under his leadership has been so devastating to Californians. And man, am I looking forward to 2026 when we elect a new governor and hopefully a Republican governor.
Right, and it's going to take that long for things to shift because I do not think that Gavin Newsom is capable of change at this point.
No. He's a lame duck at this point, right? Like there's already a bunch of eyes on who's going to be filling his seat in 2026, and his power is shifting, and it's interesting to watch.
Yeah, the only thing I'm envious of is his hair.
He does have great hair and a great smile. You got to give him that. He has the looks.
He has the looks, and he also is able to come across a lot better than our former Vice President Kamala Harris. But I think both of them are very empty politicians.
Yeah, unfortunately, we are lacking leadership up here that has substance when it comes to actually fixing the problems that California is facing.
Well, I know that you're going to help make a little dent in there with your efforts up there, California State Senator Suzette Valladares. We appreciate your time and look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you so much, Carl. I'll talk to you next week.